welcome, folks. I am going to allow a few minutes for the room to fill up. I know we're getting started here in a few minutes with our esteemed guest, Gay Hendricks and Chip Conley. But I want to start into this conversation once the room does actually fill up, so I can see it filling up right now.
Maybe while we're waiting, Stephen, people can put in the chat. Is there a chat function here? I see.
There is.
I see. Maybe people tell us where they're calling in from.
Where are you in the world? I would love to see that. I see Encinitas and San Francisco and Germany, Sweden, Ottawa, Canada, Palm Beach, Florida. It's rolling through so fast I can hardly keep up. Chicago, Dallas, Fort Worth, Baltimore, Boise, Idaho, Oregon, Burbank, Healdsburg, and New York City, Palo Alto, Monterrey, Mexico. I love it. A global audience here.
And Stephen, you are coming from?
I am in San Diego, California, where we're finally drying out from 2 weeks of rain, which was luscious for us in Southern California. And we're experiencing much lower than normal temperatures, running the fireplace and all that kind of good stuff. So, yep, San Diego, California. And Chip, where are you?
I am in southern Baja, a little town called El Pescadero near Todos Santos, about an hour north of Cabo San Lucas.
Oh, beautiful.
And Gay?
I'm in Ojai, California, about 90 minutes north of LA in a little mountain valley.
Beautiful.
Great. There's a lot of warm welcomes here. It seems like some of the folks on the call here know both of you. How are you, Chip? How are you, Gay? All that kind of good stuff. So I'd say let's go ahead and dive into this conversation, if that's okay. I'm sure there will be a few people that join us a little bit later. But to kick things off, welcome to the Genius of Modern Elders. My name is Stephen Morris. I'm your host for today. And well, I'm hoping this is going to be a provocative, a fun, a genius-filled, a wisdom well of a conversation between two modern elders. And I want to be careful that maybe, Gay, you don't consider yourself a modern elder, but I know that Chip does. So I'm thrilled to have this conversation. I know them both differently through different walks of our lives. We might actually get into the story of how this conversation came to be at some point, if it's relevant for the conversation. So, right before we get into diving into the conversation here, I want to do a little table setting and sort of set up what the next 90 minutes is going to look like. Obviously, you're in a Zoom webinar, and I think at this point, we're all pretty comfortable with Zoom, but I want to point your attention to a Q&A box that is at the lower right-hand side of your Zoom screen. What I want to make sure is that there's some time for questions at the end of this conversation. So we'll probably leave about 15 or 20 minutes for questions. Feel free to post your questions at any point during the conversation, but I'm going to hold off on answering those questions or actually serving up those questions until the end of that conversation. But if you have a question during our conversation here today, go ahead and put it in the Q&A box. And then next, sort of the format for today, I want to spend the first portion of time after I do introductions. I'm going to read little bios of both myself and of Chip and of Gay. And then I'm going to fire some questions off at them that are going to be very comfortable for them. They know all their business. They're prolific writers and speakers. So I've no doubt they're going to be super prepared for all this. And then after that, I'm going to open up a little bit of dialogue between just Chip and Gay and allow them some time to probe questions for one another and explore their curiosities about each other's work and how they show up in the world. And then the last part of this conversation is going to be centered on asking questions from the audience and me being as good as I can possibly be a curator for those questions for both Chip and Gay and me if you want to. So let's go ahead and dive in. A little bit about myself, Stephen Morris. I'm a brand and culture business advisor, an author, and I'm an artist. In 2017, I sold the brand and marketing agency that I ran for 23 years. And I founded that agency in 1994 when I moved out to San Diego. Literally, I was 1 year married. My wife and I spent our first anniversary in a Ryder truck driving cross country into San Diego and to a city where we knew no one. And I started a business at that point and built it and sold it in 2017. So today, the work that I do is both as an advisor and an author. What I work with organizations to help them discover and identify the heart and soul of who they are, what they do, why they do it, infuse that within the leadership team, express that within the culture, and then ultimately express that to the outside world. I also act as sort of a guide or a coach for entrepreneurs and business leaders to tap into what I call their own human artistry that lives at work and beyond. And my new book, The Beautiful Business, an Actionable Manifesto to Create an Unignorable Business with Love at the Core, which has been endorsed by both Chip and Gay. I appreciate both of you speaking on behalf of that book. And I also publish a widely read blog. Oh, thank you. There we go. Beautiful. A widely read blog that really talks about wholeness at work and the intersection between life, work, and business strategy and brand. And I just finished season 1 of my new podcast called The Beautiful Business Podcast. All this can be found at matterco.co. Gay Hendricks is a psychologist with a PhD from Stanford. He is a prolific writer of more than 35 books. Gay, I don't know how you do it. It is amazing, including best-selling books that include The Big Leap, and his most recent book, which I absolutely loved, I think, Gay, I've shared this with you, is called The Genius Zone. And he is a renowned and respected teacher in the field of personal growth, relationship, and body intelligence. He and his wife, Katie, have worked together for more than 40 years. And I know, Gay, that you guys just celebrated a milestone anniversary. So congratulations back in October on that. And you run workshops and host trainings worldwide. They have both appeared on more than 500 radio and television shows, including Oprah, CNN, CNBC, 48 Hours, and I'm sure the list of those appearances continues to climb. In addition to this work at the Hendricks Institute, Gay is currently continuing his mystery series that he began in the book called The First Rule of 10. Gay, I've got to read those mystery books. They sound amazing. I've worked with Gay, and I can tell you firsthand, he is one of the most gifted, generous, creative people that I've had the honor to work with. So welcome, Gay. And Chip Conley. Chip is a New York Times bestselling author and a serial entrepreneur. His books include Peak, How Great Companies Get Their Mojo from Maslow, Emotional Equations, a book that I absolutely loved, and his most recent book called Wisdom at Work, The Making of a Modern Elder. I'm sure we'll talk about all of those books that we mentioned here today. He is a hospitality entrepreneur who has disrupted his favorite industry twice. At age 26, he founded and ran Joie de Vivre Hospitality, which he grew to the second largest boutique hotel brand in the US. After selling Joie de Vivre in 2010, he accepted an invitation from the young founders at Airbnb, where he helped to transform that organization into what it is today, which is the world's largest hospitality brand. Now, Chip spends much of his energy as the co-founder of Modern Elder Academy, a midlife wisdom school which is on a mission to reclaim and rejuvenate the role of modern elder in our society. MEA is located in Baja California, Mexico, and I know, hopefully this is okay to say so, but I know that there's plans for a Santa Fe location. Chip holds a BA and an MBA from Stanford University. You guys have a Stanford background in common. And Chip has served on the boards of Burning Man Project and Esalen Institute. I would describe Chip as an artist, entrepreneur, and social alchemist, and have taken part in Modern Elder Academy. And I have found it to be an incredibly thought-provoking, a beautifully and artistically orchestrated program that I know that helps people reclaim, navigate, and own their own modern eldership and the vitality of midlife and beyond. Chip and Gay, welcome to the conversation.
Wow, thank you. Honored
Thank
to
you
be
so
here.
much, Stephen.
Well, good. And there was one question I do want to answer here at the very beginning. Yes, this is being recorded. It's being recorded for those folks who have signed up and but won't be able to attend. We'll post this recording in some public atmosphere and probably send out an email to anybody who signed up for this at a later date. It'll probably take us a couple days to do that. Fair enough. All right. First question for both of you. One of the things that I find remarkably interesting about both, that you both have in common, is you have this seemingly transcendent ability to be so prolific in a wide amount of people that you touch in the world. You're out there, you're social, you're connected, you're making things happen, yet you seem to balance this work of what I would call a solitary practice of contemplative life and creativity. And I wonder, how do you pull off this magic trick of the extraordinary both and within that? Gay, you want to start?
Sure. I just had a memory, speaking of Stanford. I learned to meditate when I was a PhD student at Stanford back in the early 1970s. And when I got there, I'd never heard of a whole bunch of California things like meditation and therapy and yoga and things like that. But very quickly, I caught on, and I just saw a little poster one weekend on the campus about TM. They were teaching transcendental meditation, and I went to this introductory lecture and ended up learning how to meditate. That was my first excursion into anything that resembled balance in my life, because up until then I was just, I was committed to getting my PhD by the time I was 28, and I made it with 10 days to spare, and I was committed to getting my first university job. And so, but it was that learning to meditate where I kind of dropped out of that world every day for 20 minutes or so, a couple of times a day. And it really gave me a sense of the contrast between the purely intellectual world I'd been living inside of and another world, which was a world of consciousness and the expansion of consciousness, and watching how the more I tuned into that inner world, the better things went on the outside, that I'd been missing out on this whole chunk of life. And it was incredible. And I've not missed a day since, by the way. I'm still a very dedicated meditator, coming up on my 50th anniversary of daily meditation. And the key point of that has been that discovery of that expanding inner world that has things like consciousness and love and presence and things like that in it. And so that's become, equally important to me, that cultivation of that inner space, and also the ability to be in the flow of love in a relationship. Those things became of just as much importance as all the stuff I was doing out in the world. I think it probably not only changed my life, but probably saved it too.
Very good. Very good. And I wonder, like, did you have a sense that inner expansion actually there's some corollary, maybe not cause and effect, but maybe cause and effect to the expansion of your outer world?
Yes, definitely. I didn't have a way of kind of conceptualizing it at the time, but I just noticed it started to happen. The way I look at it now is, life, creativity kind of has two strokes to it in a way. There's the going down inside and finding the ideas that illuminate you and that you want to bring out into the world and the things you want to accomplish. So that's kind of the inward stroke. And then there's the outward stroke of how am I going to express this? But I know before I was living at half a stroke. I was just on the, but I wasn't going down in there to find out the true essence of what I wanted to bring to the world. Yeah. That's why now, one of our main teachings is to focus on finding what you most love to do And because invariably, the more you open up to that, the more you find that makes your biggest contribution to the world at the same time.
Very good. Chip, reframing the question just so you have an opportunity to respond, like, this balance between inner and outer, this contemplative life, life of deep inward creativity with this massive, social connection you have and impact that you have in the outer world. How do you pull off that magic trick?
Although I would have, if I was first, I would have said what Gay said. so I'm just gonna, and weirdly enough, when I was at Stanford as an undergrad and at graduate school for business, it was at the Esalen Institute in Big Sur where I actually learned how to meditate, and that has served me for now about 40 years. But let me actually give you a different answer. When I think about the three businesses that I've been involved in my life that have taken a lot of my energy and my time, it was in nature where the epiphany happened. So it was literally in Big Sur on a hike where I just said, I want to create a boutique hotel company called Joie de Vivre. What a stupid name for a company in the United States. No one knows how to spell it or what it means or how to pronounce it either.
Yeah.
But that was on a hike in Big Sur. When I was at my time at Airbnb, soon after, not long after the company was founded, it was on a walk on a beach with one of the founders that I really helped unlock, I think, for the company, what the opportunity for the company was moving forward, which was one of the unlocks was to say, we're in the belong anywhere business. But that didn't happen in a conference room. That happened literally on a beach. And then down here in Baja, after I'd spent my time at Airbnb and I was becoming an advisor, I was no longer a full-time employee or leader. I was working on my book, Wisdom at Work, The Making of a Modern Elder. And I went for a run on the beach and I had a Baja aha. I had an epiphany, which was, why are there no such things as midlife wisdom schools where people can actually reimagine and repurpose themselves in midlife? So I would just say what I call it is spying on the divine. And I actually put it in my calendar and I allocate time, each week to spying on the divine. It's hard. My calendar is nutty, as some people who are on this call know. But being in nature is the ultimate teacher for me. And it is what actually also helps me balance and see my small place in the world.
Yeah. I have found the same thing. And, part of the work that I've done with David White, he has this process that he actually got from John O'Donohue, which is the art of asking beautiful questions. And the mindset around that is this, beautiful questions are questions that cannot be answered by the strategic mind alone. They're almost felt and lived into, as Rilke would say. There are lived questions that we live with. And I actually think Michael Ray, who taught at Stanford a beautiful course called Creativity in Business, and he wrote a book that followed up on that. He probed into some of these quote unquote live with questions, which are also sort of forms of beautiful questions. And what David talks about is that time in nature, to your point, Chip, is one of the most fertile times to be asking yourself and living with these beautiful questions, which frankly reorient our trajectory in life. They allow us to see a world completely different than the world of, work, when we're at work in a conference room, or, even, when we're looking to the abyss of a blank page and trying to come up with new ideas and contemplation. But it is through nature that can inspire us. And for me, that certainly worked in that particular realm. So I wonder, I know, Gay, you and Katie have a New Year's ritual. Here we are at the precipice of the new year on the 5th of January. I want to talk a little bit about some of the rituals that you guys do to cultivate some of the aliveness, the creativity, stoking the curiosity within your worlds. And I know, Chip, you have a weekly ritual, which I am just in love with, of wisdom reflections. I'm not sure what you actually call it, but I think it's a wisdom journal. But I'm curious about, I want to just open up the conversation around rituals that you guys do, both at the start or end of a year, but also maybe on a regular basis that stokes your curiosity and your creativity.
Well, we have our own version of divine questions here. We call them wonder questions, and we have a whole bunch of them we ask. But one of them that I mentioned a little while ago, we always invite people to begin them with a of genuine, sincere wonder. So a wonder question would go something like this: what do I most love doing? Or what do I most love doing that makes the biggest contribution to other people at the same time? And so when people come here for a one-day intensive, one of the first things they do is they go in a little room by themselves for 10 minutes and just live with that question. What do I most love to do? And what makes my biggest contribution? And sometimes people will come out of that room. It's like they do it at 9 o'clock in the morning, and by 9:10, they come out of the room and they say, okay, I got my money's worth. Because a lot of people have not.
Holy goodness.
Like Blaise Pascal, the French philosopher, said, almost all of humankind problems stem from the inability to sit in a room by ourselves for 10 minutes doing nothing. And so we just solved that problem here at 9 o'clock when the first person comes in. We put them in a room by themselves doing nothing but asking a wonder question. But it's, the reason we use the hum is because, well, it's a sign of wonder, but it's also for technical reasons, because when you hum, it integrates the right and the left hemispheres of the mind. It's one of the functions of it brings the two halves of the mind together. So it takes it out of a purely intellectual inquiry and puts it into something that has mind, body, and spirit capabilities.
Yeah, so good. So good. Yeah.
Wow. I love this. Gay, it's just such an honor to be here with you.
Thank you. You too.
So, I'll come up. I have two. I'll first speak to the one that you mentioned, Stephen, which is when I was 28 years old and a very clueless young CEO who'd started a company 2 years earlier and had one hotel in San Francisco, and the Loma Prieta earthquake had come along and nobody was coming to San Francisco for months. I was so clueless that I realized I needed to quickly learn things so that I could actually keep the business open. And to have a company called Joie de Vivre, but to not be feeling much joie de vivre, joy of life myself, put me on the spot. And so I actually took an old journal that someone had given me, and I wrote on the cover it, my wisdom book. True story. It's a funny story. 33 years later. So what I did was every single weekend, my practice or my ritual was to metabolize what I'd learned that week with just 4 to 8 bullet points. Just so it was not a journal. It was not sort of emotions or a diary. It was really quite functional in the sense that it was trying to reflect upon what did I learn this week? And what are some of the key lessons I had? Because actually, frankly, that is the way you cultivate and harvest wisdom.
Yeah.
Now, I can't say that 33 years ago that I'd done any studying on wisdom to understand that, but I will say I called the book that. And so 33 years later, well, let me say this, honest truth. So for about 20 years, I had 9 wisdom books, some of them up here. And they were just journals. At that point, I went from weekly to more like monthly. And then at some point I went to Google Docs. So they're no longer in journals, they're in Google Docs. But the process of trying to digest and understand what you've learned over a short period of time, it's a beautiful question. And it's a beautiful question for a team. The best question any leadership team could ever ask themselves once a quarter is, what's the number one thing you learned in the last quarter? And then everybody shares it with each other. The other practice that I would say is what we at Modern Elder Academy at MEA called the Great Midlife Edit. And this relates to your New Year's resolutions. New Year's resolutions tend to be a thing that's additive. Okay, what can I do this year? And often it's like, what didn't I do last year? And there's no editing function. But I'm a big believer in Carl Jung and Richard Rohr, who actually was just a student here at MEA, a 78-and-a-half-year-old student who's written 51 books. that's, that's very impressive. He was here with Lynn Twist for the Soul of Money workshop. Well, the bottom line is they both said the first half of your life is about accumulating. The second half of your life is about editing. So we call it the Great Midlife Edit. And it's an exercise we do every week here with our, every weekly cohort, where people actually look at what mindsets, identities, ways of being are no longer serving them. They then talk about them, then they actually write them on the piece of paper, they go to the fire pit, and at sunset, one at a time, they say what it is, put it in the fire, and then they say, what are they replacing it with? So what I did for my New Year's resolution this year was, it was not about what's the additive. What am I adding to my list of things I want to try to resolve to do this year? It was actually, what am I going to get rid of? Yeah. What am I letting go of? What am I editing from my life? And we did that as a group, as a New Year's ritual here, as part of our leadership team. Yeah, it's a good thing.
Yeah. So, I imagine that also sort of spurs on a conversation around how to say no to the things that we should be saying no to. I mean, the reality is, the more success you gain in life, the more, circles of people that you're connected with, things like that, the more opportunities that come your way. And, there's easy ones that would fall on either end of the spectrum, either a hell yes or a hell no kind of thing. But it's that sort of middle ground, that gray area, that I think is a really hard set of discernment things to say, well, should I say yes to this, and under what criteria will I say yes? And I wonder if either of you have a discernment process, a set of navigation and or radar, a checklist of, well, a full body yes for me feels like this, or the things that I'm going to say yes to are sort of fit within this realm.
It's a great question, because Katie and I, you mentioned our New Year's ritual a moment ago. I wanted to just tell everybody what that is. It's very simple, but you could do it any time of the year. You don't need to wait for New Year's. But the way we do it is, on New Year's Eve, we spend a lot of time experiencing gratitude and expressing appreciations to people, that we call or send a note to. But it's a day of gratitude. And it's that kind of two-stroke thing about manifestation, where you go down deep inside and feel grateful for what you have. And then on New Year's Day, you come out and tell the universe what you want and how you'd like things to be. And so sometimes we talk about material things. There's usually a few material things we want to manifest during the year. We've been working for the last few years on manifesting sewers. I live in an area where we don't have sewers. I've been promising to get them here for a long time. And,
wow, so that's surprising. I love it.
Yeah, the din gets louder. And so, but like another thing, we have a series of in-person things we're doing this year for the first time in a couple of years because of the COVID and all that. And so, we set intentions for how we want those to go and how the kind of feeling we want to create as we're doing them. So it's go down inside, feel grateful for the way things are, and then come out and say how you'd like it to be. Also, too, I use the image of a automatic pilot on an airplane as to how people should think about their goals, because commitment is important, but recommitment is super important, because almost everybody's going to fall off the wagon or wander off on a tangent or be in the middle of starting one business and suddenly get the burning desire to start another one. I've done that with myself. And so there's all sorts of things that you can do like that. So I like to say we're like an automatic pilot. You set the intention to go to the goal, but then when you drift, just correct back again, because the automatic pilot goes, okay, we're going a little bit to the right, let's correct to the left. And, oh, we're going a little bit too far to the left, let's correct to the right. And it's doing that 1,000,000 times an hour. And so it gets all the way to the destination by being wrong most of the time, because it's willing to recommit and get back into the original commitment again. So that's the way I like it. It builds in an opportunity for us to mess up and then get right back on again.
love it. I love it. Chip, any discernment process for what you say yes or no to?
Um, I'd say only a couple of things. Number one is wisdom and intuition. There's been very little psychological research on this, which is shocking to me, because I like, what's the difference between wisdom and intuition? Well, I do think when it comes to discernment around how to spend my time, I don't get out an Excel spreadsheet and try to analyze it. I trust my intuition.
Yeah.
And that's part of the reason I'm here with you today,
Mm.
along with Gay. And I think Gay had the same perspective probably. So I would just say that's one thing. I'd say the other thing is I do create a set of strategic priorities each year. That sounds very corporate. Therefore, in my role as a CEO, I say, like, these are the 5 things, for example, this year that I really want us as a company to accomplish. And then that becomes the discernment tool to determine whether something that's coming my way is either a green, a yellow, or a red light. If it's a red light, not going to do it because it doesn't really fit these. If it's a green, it means, yeah, it's serving the purpose as well. And it's the yellow. Yellow is when you say, okay, there's 2 kinds of yellow lights when it comes to deciding, am I going to do this or not? Or are we as an organization going to do this? Number one is there's a yellow light of let's learn more, and then we'll decide. And then there's a yellow light of let's not do it now, but let's put it in a parking lot. Whereas a red light is like, nope, it can be resurfaced in the future, but no, we're not even going to talk or think about it anymore. A yellow light is either explore it further and then we decide, or put it in a parking lot and maybe we'll give it attention next year.
Beautiful. Good. I want to shift gears here and
I would say one last thought.
Yeah, go ahead.
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I am I'm so excited to talk to Gay because I'm fascinated by psychology. I took one psychology class in college with Phil Zimbardo. That's it. And I never took any more. And so one of the things I just want to say to your question is anticipated regret. I'm a big fan of anticipated regret as a discernment tool of how you live your life today. And maybe Gay and I can talk further about this when we get into maybe a conversation between the two of us. When I'm thinking about something, and if I say no to something, I know that psychological studies have shown that, the regret of not doing something, it's about twice as painful as the regret of doing something and wishing you hadn't done it. Yeah. So asking yourself, it's the question I like to ask myself is, and we do it here at MEA, is what is it that I know or have done today that I wish I had known or done 10 years ago? Yeah. And similarly, what 10 years from now will I wish I had done or learned today? And that's what led me to learning Spanish, living in Mexico, knowing that, it's not any easier at age 71 than at age 61. And so that is an influence on me as I'm deciding whether to say yes or no to something, is will I have anticipated regret?
I love that. And, it reminds me, I wrote a blog post in the early days of COVID that had to do with a list of things that you'll regret not doing because of COVID. And so, it was just really a thought exercise for me, thinking, okay, here is this thing that is completely out of most of our control, and yet we're going to have to live with it. And it wasn't really painted with the question of like, well, how do we take advantage of this? But rather, what are the regrets that we could potentially have for things that we didn't do? So for instance, a couple of the ones that came to mind and I shared in this blog post were the regret of not taking time off during times when there isn't a lot of work to do for a lot of people. And that's making the assumption that you're not in healthcare or, frontline worker and things of that nature, which is a lot of us. And then other things like not doing things like, if you're an entrepreneur, shoring up the heart and soul of your business, creating thought leadership, doubling down on what your purpose is, things of that nature. And that particular blog post, while it was projective, and I felt like I was really taking some risks on that, because none of them could have ended up being true or actually good advice. it ended up being a particularly well-liked blog post because it got people thinking about this regret mindset and how do we fence off or protect ourselves from the things that we could potentially regret, even from a micro standpoint. So shifting gears real quick, Gay, I want to put you on the spot a little bit, or really create the invitation. I'm going to make the assumption that not everyone here on this conversation knows about the Big Leap. I would love for you to just give us a 50,000 foot view of what is the Big Leap all about, and maybe if you can tether in a bit of genius zone within that.
Yes. Well, the Big Leap is about two big things. It's about how we get ourselves stuck in what I call upper limit problems. And an upper limit problem is where you sabotage yourself when things are going well. And there's a bunch of ways human beings do that. We get sick, we start arguments, we create relationship dramas or dramas at work. And these are things that we use as kind of like a set of brakes that we put on ourselves. And so I discovered that first on myself. I would notice that when I first started discovering it was in the early 70s, again, when I was there at Stanford, because we were working a lot in our counseling center with some of the smartest people I'd ever met in my life in the original Silicon Valley that was being set up there. There are all these new companies like Intel and Hewlett Packard and Varian that made things that I didn't understand at all, but I certainly understood the stresses the executives were under. And so I would work with one person after the other who was just brilliant in their minds. But what they'd often do is they'd have a big breakthrough, good thing at work. Then they'd go home that night and have a huge fight with family or partner, or the other way around. Things would be going great at home. Like one of my clients got remarried and was in a state of bliss, and then the next week created a gigantic drama at work that sort of put him back in a negative spiral again. And so I started looking at those kind of things like that, and I realized in myself, my girlfriend and I would get along well for 2 or 3 days, and then we'd have an argument. We'd take sometimes 10 days then to get back out of it. So I realized that we come with these upper limit problems, and I began to study what's underneath them. And as I did that, I unearthed about 3 or 4 big fears that were underneath that were really the drivers of the upper limit problem. And so the Big Leap explores those fears and shows you how to get out from under them and get into what I call your genius zone. Because when you get out from under your upper limit problem, you have more time to expand into doing what you most love to do. And as you do that, then you uncover more of this elusive thing that I'm calling your genius, which is that thing that you're really here to do, that thing that, like, if you're on your deathbed 50 years from now and somebody comes in and says, was your life a success? And you say, yes. And they say, why? What made it a success? Well, you say, because I did this and I experienced this and I felt this. I actually did that when I was in my 30s, right after I'd gotten together with Katie. We were in this new relationship and I hadn't made a commitment to it yet. And I had this insight that just about everything I'd ever done in my life that didn't go well was because I wasn't really fully committed to it. I would kind of have one foot in the door, and like in relationships, I'd have one foot out the back door the moment I put my foot in the door. And so it was a lack of commitment that was driving a lot of the problems. And so I started making commitments to what I call my genius zone, which is just doing more of what I already love to do. And I realized I was only doing at the beginning maybe 10% of my time every day in my genius zone. So I started bumping that up. And by the end of the last century, I was spending virtually all my time doing only things I most love to do and doing the things that made the biggest contribution. So I haven't had a job now in 20 or 30 years because I've been focusing only on doing what I love to do. And I can't rightly call that work.
Yeah. And then one thing I also love about sort of the big leap and sort of the language that's within that is, we all have these zones of, we start off with zones of incompetence, then we go to zones of competence. We're actually pretty good at something. And then we get into the zone of excellence, which in your book, you talk very beautifully about. We get stuck in those zones because we feel like, wow, the work, we're getting paid well, we're doing work that feels kind of fulfilling, but it isn't really fully enlivening in us. And I think I would suspect, and I would love your perspective on this, that leap that goes from that zone of excellence into the zone of genius is probably one of the most courageous ones to actually make.
Yeah, because, like imagine Columbus with that little gang of people on that boat, and what must have gone through their minds when they cruised out of that harbor and got out there in the big old ocean going for this new thing. But in a way, we all have to be our Columbus or our explorer, or our Neil Armstrong, because I think life only takes on its real glow when we're doing what we're supposed to be doing, what we love to do, and what makes that contribution to other people. Those are the folks that I see being the happiest on our planet. And whatever you think of people like Richard Branson or Elon Musk or folks like that, they're passionate, they're committed, they're doing something that, whatever it is that they're fully engaged in. And I really have a great deal of respect for that. Here we say, peace of mind comes from total participation. It doesn't come from backing off from the world. It comes from being in the world in a way that allows you to preserve your inner consciousness at the same time as you're making your contribution on the outside.
Yeah. David White tells a great story in Crossing the Unknown Sea, a book that he published in the late 90s. And he talks about it through a conversation of this, brother David Steindl-Ross. And the story goes, David's coming off of a week of, very difficult time in a nonprofit, and he's just utterly exhausted. And so they sit down at David's kitchen table over a glass of wine, and David White says to brother David, "Speak to me of exhaustion." And David Steindl-Ross's response is, well, exhaustion, the antidote to exhaustion is full commitment. It's utter commitment. So, and we tend to think about as exhaustion as what we need as the remedy for that is rest and rejuvenation, which can sometimes be true. But to your point there, Gay, this full-on commitment actually feeds energy into our world. And when we're in that realm, we are enlivened because we're in that realm. So
when you're doing what you most love to do, you're living in the sweet spot of your creative essence. Yeah. And that's where it doesn't take a lot of time to accomplish big things. I launched and sold a successful business within 3 years that came out of just a 10-second little awareness in meditation one day. And when I came out, it was pretty much fully formed. And then it was just putting the pieces together. And so I think there's a way that the more we open up our inner space, things come to us more fully formed rather than fragmented. Yeah. And so it's to our great advantage to do whatever we can to expand that sense of inner presence and inner space, because that gives us deeper access to our creative essence.
Beautiful, beautiful. And Chip, shifting gears here, and
let me say one quick
ahead.
thing about Gay's book. So Gay's book, The Big Leap, is in our MEA library here in Baja, and it's very dog-eared. People take it out all the time, and there's lots of notes in it, and so it's a great book. As is the
suggestion: open a bookstore, sell it.
There you go. See, that's the psychologist becoming the businessman, whereas I'm the businessman becoming a psychologist. So.
Yeah, you can sell the beautiful business down there too, Chip. If
okay, exactly. It is actually here. It's here.
Cool, good. So wisdom at work. Give us the 50,000-foot view on that.
Well, here's the thing that's interesting, and this is I sort of alluded to it for a second ago. I'm not a psychologist. I took one psychology class in college, but psychology came naturally to me in the business world. And, you know, one of the things I often say is the most neglected fact in business is that we're all human. It doesn't show up on a balance sheet, but understanding humans, Daniel Goleman's work on emotional intelligence is very clear about the fact that 2/3 of the success of business leaders is because of their EQ, and only 1/3 is because of their IQ or their level of experience in the work or in the job. So my books have been about the intersection of psychology and business. And and you know, one of the books was, there's been 5, and one of the books was influenced by Maslow, and one was influenced by Viktor Frankl. And this book was really influenced by Erik Erikson and developmental life stages. And what I was fascinated by at Airbnb is they started calling me the modern elder at age 52, 9 years ago. And I was like, I don't want to be the modern elder. I saw my own ageism. It's like, what do you mean by the modern elder? Why are you calling me the modern elder? And what I learned from them was that they said, Chip, a modern elder is as curious as they are wise. I was like, okay, well, if that's a modern elder, I will be a modern elder. Mm-hmm. And long story short is, over the course of the next 4 years full-time, working in a tech company with no background in tech, it was not my genius zone. It was me having a beginner's mind and being willing to be the most curious and dumbest person in the room, while also mentoring the CEO, who's 21 years younger than me, who I was reporting to, who was a co-founder. It was a fascinating journey. What it led me to is asking the question of, like, how are we, if we're living longer and yet power in a digital society is moving younger, as evidenced by all these tech companies. So we're living longer, power is moving younger, and yet we're feeling less relevant maybe as we get older. And yet for so many people, by choice or necessity, they have to work longer. What are we going to do with all these modern elders? With the idea that elder is different than elderly. Elder is a relative term. Elderly might be the last 5 or 10 years of your life. Being an elder speaks to your relative age compared to the people around you. So at the average age at Airbnb being 26 and me 52, I was an elder for sure. So the book came out of that experience. Wisdom at Work, The Making of a Modern Elder was really meant to be a bit of a manifesto, but also a prescriptive guide for how someone in midlife could reimagine a new path for themselves. I like to call it same seed, different soil. Like, you've built some wisdom along the way. But as I learned, moving from the boutique hotel world or the hospitality industry into a tech company that was focused on travel and hospitality, I could take my wisdom and apply it in new soil. But I had to learn a few things along the way. I had to learn how to be incredibly humble. I had to learn how to evolve in terms of my own identity, to be the CEO of a company of 3,500 people, and then all of a sudden to be reporting to someone who's 31 years old. That took some, right sizing of my ego. And then I had to learn, and then I had to learn how to collaborate, and I could use my EQ and to create more psychological safety on teams in the company, which was, very important. And then finally, I learned how to be, just a great counselor. Yeah. And over the course of my 4 years there, 7 years, 4 years full-time, 3 years as an advisor, I was a mentor to 100 different Airbnb employees, but they were mentoring me as much as I was mentoring them. I think the future of learning and development in companies is all about mutual mentorship. How do we mentor each other in both directions, age-wise? Because I have something to learn from someone 25 years younger than me, and they may have something to learn from me. Yeah. So Wisdom at Work was what really came from that. And and then Modern Elder Academy actually came out of that as well.
Yeah. It's interesting as I've been through Modern Elder Academy and read and reread over the holidays, Wisdom at Work, one of the things that strikes me about Wisdom at Work as a book is it's, even though, a lot of the context and even examples within it are about work or work centric, the book itself isn't about work. It, in my opinion, or at least the way I read it, and maybe I'm just editorializing to Steve's personal world, but it also overlays with this mindset of, no organization will out-evolve where the leaders are within that organization. So the reality is all leadership evolution or even business evolution is an inside job. And that inside job starts with the individual leaders healing themselves, understanding where they're at in life and what their strengths are, so that they can take everything that they've learned from their personal lives and apply it with the most brilliance in the world at work. And sometimes it's about identity shift. And I think that especially in midlife, and trust me, I've been through this, selling a company and shedding the identity of once CEO, no longer CEO, who am I now? Wisdom at Work was utterly instrumental in the inner journey of that, and not just the outer journey of what do I do next vocationally, professionally, and even living in my zone of genius. And so, I say that mostly, well, first, I'm curious on your perspective of that, but I also say that for folks who are interested in a book like this, and, the title could be off-putting if they're actually wanting to do inner work. I think this book is as much about inner work as it is about work.
Of course it is. Yeah, no, the truth is that corporate development is always aligned with personal development. Yes, there are the Steve Jobs of the world. There are the ranting and raving leaders without much EQ. As he got more successful and Apple got more successful, his EQ improved. Yeah. It was still pretty low.
Yeah.
But those are the aberrations. Those, you can't look at that and then say, okay, that's everybody. But what I will say is, yes, we started the Modern Elder Academy sort of as a reflection of the book. And then we thought, okay, everybody's going to come to the Modern Elder Academy. We had 2,000 alumni from 30 countries at this point. And we thought, okay, it's all about how do you rejigger your career, but it's not. It's actually, how do you get clear on who you are as a human? What is your calling? And your calling may have nothing to do with your career.
Yeah.
Your calling may have something to do with your hobby, or being a great parent or grandparent, or being a political activist about a particular cause that you really care about. We're a big fan at MEA of Ikigai, the idea, and I think of Gay's work very much this way, the idea that you focus on what are you passionate at, what do you do well, what will you get paid doing, and what does the world need? And it is that, that Venn diagram where right in the center is your Ikigai. It's the place where the sweet spot, to use Gay's language, where a person can actually feel not just that they're doing the thing that enlivens them, but they're also doing the thing that the world needs for them to be doing. Yeah. And often that is an inside job, because frankly, if you're not doing the thing, I'm sort of paraphrasing Joseph Campbell here, but if you're not doing the thing that the world, if you're not doing the thing that enlivens you, the world doesn't necessarily need it. And so,
yeah, beautiful.
One thing I really appreciate you mentioning is Hendricks and Chip. He was a big influence on me. And if folks, if you haven't run across Hendricks, he was a great developmental psychologist at Harvard most of the time. And he developed a theory of adult development where he broke each decade down into what he called a developmental crisis or a developmental challenge. And the one that I think a lot of people face is the one people face at 50. He said your 50s is a daily choice between creativity or stagnation. He called it generativity most of the time.
He talked to generativity, exactly.
Yeah. But it's basically, are you tapping into your own singular, unique creativity every day? Or are you going through the motions? And boy, does that hit people hard in their 50s, because a lot of times in your 30s and 40s, you're so busy kind of making it in the world that you don't kind of go, like that old saying about you were so busy climbing the ladder that you didn't realize it was against the wrong wall. And, just the act of adrenaline pumping, keeps you going. But when you're around 50, the way we say it here is every breath you take is a breath of stagnation or a breath of creativity. When we were writing our book, Conscious Loving Ever After, which is a book for couples at midlife and beyond, basically after the age of 42, 45 for the rest of their lives. What's the key factor that keeps relationships getting juicier and juicier as people get older? And the key factor is creativity. It's, are you allowing that blossoming part of you to really thrive? Or are you kind of keeping it hidden while you go through the motions in your excellence zone rather than your genius zone?
Yeah. I want to enter the question of, well, I'm going to ask Gay to go first because this is your domain, Chip. Gay, how would you define a modern elder, and how do you feel about however that definition would be served up, assuming you have one? You may not have one, and that's okay. How do you feel like you've embraced whatever that definition is?
Well, I formally hadn't thought up a definition of that, but just in my own experience, a modern elder is a person who is rooted and grounded in their experience and is willing to have even more experience, that they're rooted and grounded in their authentic experience, but are also at the same time willing to flourish, learn more, learn something every day. To me, it's that learning edge that makes people thrive as they get older. And the people I see that aren't thriving are kind of turning down the volume on the outside world and not listening to things coming in and not interacting with people. I had the great good fortune of living across the road from a junior high school. And so one of the things I love to do is when I get a new manuscript, I'll take a piece of it over there and borrow one of their 8th grade classrooms from a teacher. We're all friends here in my little town, and try out my ideas on a bunch of 13-year-olds and just see how they respond. Because to me, if an idea is valid, it ought to appeal to a billionaire and a 8th grader simultaneously. And so to me, being open to all sorts of different inputs from life is one of the things that makes eldering juicy. Another thing too, I don't know if you guys remember this, being youthful members of the modern elder community like you are. Well, back in the 50s, there was a famous country singer named Eddie Arnold. And he was like the country gentleman, very handsome guy, sang these great cowboy songs. And later on in his life, he became kind of the elder statesman of Nashville and country music. Well, something caught my eye that he said quite a long time ago. They were having a controversy about whether Bob Dylan should be allowed into the Country Music Hall of Fame because he'd only had one country album called Nashville Skyline. And so they were having this big controversy about it. And so they called Eddie Arnold to be the guy that made the pronouncement. And they asked him, and he said, "Oh, sure, let him in." And they said, "Well, you didn't take long to make that decision. Why not?" And he says, "Because I'm old and rich and don't give a damn." I remember hearing that at the time, and I said, "Oh, that's interesting. If you're old and rich, you not give a damn about what people think, and because that's what they were asking him. Are you going to think that you're selling out traditional country music if you let this young upstart Bob Dylan in?" And he said, "No, I'm old and rich and don't give a damn," because he was not attached to it. And that really made an impression on me. I said, there are lots of life, even though I'm not old and rich yet, I can just not give a damn about certain aspects of life, like what people think of me or, those kind of things, just to put my attention on what I most love to do and keep it right there in the sweet spot.
Liberating. So liberating. Yeah, so good. So Chip, I'm sure you have a working definition. Maybe it's evolved over time of a modern elder. How would you synthesize that?
Based upon what my young cohorts at Airbnb suggested to me, I would say The modern elder is the person who's the perfect alchemist of curiosity and wisdom. And they know when to actually up, they know when to up the ante on one versus the other. Similarly, I actually think one of the things we get better at, and this has not been studied a lot psychologically, but I really am fascinated by this. And one of our PhD fellows, MEA fellows, is working on something on this right now. I think alchemy is what you get better at as you age. What does that mean? It's like, okay, gravitas and levity, knowing when you come into a group of people or a situation, when do you need a little bit of gravitas and when do you need a little bit of levity? When do you need curiosity and when do you need wonder? When do you need introversion in your own life versus extroversion? Yeah. And so alchemy is, to me, a great modern elder is someone who is a phenomenal alchemist. I think what makes a modern elder different than, say, a traditional elder is, let's say from the start of eldership, there's always been curious Socrates-like people asking questions. But also, I think the way we've historically thought of elders is that they're like, revere your elders, children to be seen, not heard, and like all the power rests with the old guys, old white guys, given that there's 3 old white guys here. Stephen, you're not that old, but there's an element of, I don't want that kind of traditional eldership or elderhood, because actually I think we live in an era where intergenerational collaboration and like a new generational compact is exceptionally important. New thinking, fresh blood coming in. So I do think that the difference between a traditional elder and a modern elder is the structure is different in terms of where power rests. And so we try to figure out how, as a modern elder, you are dispersing power and learning from younger people. Because we live in an era where if we don't do that very well, we won't be prepared for some of the societal problems that need to be solved, and that I think younger people can help us with.
I love that. And I love this attribute of either paradox or polarities, and the ability to hold the complexity of those things together and to do precisely what you're describing here, Chip, which is to create alchemy, and which really means not just balancing the both and, but transforming them into a new set of wisdom or application or practice that takes things like societal conversations or business strategies or cultural strifes beyond just the holding the space of the both and. I just think that's really brilliant. So I want to shift gears here real quick and give both Chip and Gay an opportunity to fire some questions off at one another and have some fun with whatever you guys want to discuss.
Gosh.
Great. You know what I love to do? One of the things I always love to do, I was once sitting in an airplane seat next to a guy who happened to make the kind of noodles that I lived off of when I was a starving graduate student. Do you remember those Top Ramen things? In the supermarket? Well, they were 25 cents a piece, but if you bought 5 of them, you got 5 for $1. And I was living on $300 a month in Palo Alto, California, which is bare minimum starvation. But anyway, I happened to, later on in my life, I was sitting up in first class cruising along, and it happened to be the CEO of the noodle company was there. And so for the first time, I was bold enough to ask this question, which is, what's the biggest problem the CEO of a noodle company has to solve? And he told me at the time, I don't want to go into it at the moment, but I want to ask you that same question. What's the biggest problem in your business that you have to solve on a regular basis, Chip?
It comes down to human problems. It comes down to, so we're a fast growing organization. We're a social enterprise, very dedicated to making a difference in the world and not losing our soul while we are scaling. So I think many organizations have that as their polarity, scale versus soul. How do you create the alchemy there? But I ultimately, so much of this is, sometimes there's the old guard in the company who's done things one way, and then there's a new guard coming in. And I think so much of it is learning how to give people the sense that they're respected and that we want them to be here along for the ride, the people who've been there. But there's a new collection of people that need to come into the organization that are going to help us become even better at solving our mission, or adjusting our mission. And so I would say, again, it comes back to the idea of how do you create an organization where people are focused on the mission and less focused on the infighting, or the fear of like, oh, we're bringing someone in and they've got a better title than me, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. That's going to happen. It's natural. But how do we instead create an environment where people understand and there's a transparency for why we're bringing people in, and what their role is, and so I would say that's what I've always had to deal with it, because each of the 3 companies that I've had, significant involvement in, going back now 35 years, each one of those 3 has been fast growing. And I've also had a failure. I had one failure of a company that I started in between when I sold Joie de Vivre and when I joined Airbnb. So, I haven't had not all successes. So thanks for that question. Okay. I think the question I'd love to ask Gay is, what led you to writing the Genius Zone after the Big Leap? And what is the Genius Zone? What did the Genius Zone speak to that the Big Leap didn't actually get to?
Yes, great question. Well, it boils down again to 2 things. Like I said, the Big Leap was about 2 things: the Genius Zone, how to get into your Genius Zone, and how to get through your upper limit problems. The Genius Zone is about 2 things that I think are kind of like the whipped cream on top of the ice cream sundae and the cherry on top of the sundae, in the sense that there are 2 things in the new book that I think every human being needs to understand and do. One of them is to understand that a great many problems in our daily lives, or even in our business lives, come from trying to control things that we actually have no control over. And those things that we get consumed in trying to control that we don't actually have any control over, like whether somebody likes you or not, or things like that, they eat up a lot of the energy that could actually be used to focus on things you actually do have control over. Mm-hmm. And so step number 1 of the 2 things that are in the Genius Zone, number 1 is how to spot those moments that I call genius moments that could be turned into a genius moment where you're actually feeling stuck. So one of the points the book makes is don't avoid being stuck. Go ahead, when you get stuck, just ask yourself this big question: what am I trying to control that I actually have no power to control? And that question, which has been around for thousands of years, has enormous transformational power to it. One of the first kind of humankind's first self-help book was written by Epictetus back 2,000 years ago. And it's has the first line in it. It says, "The secret of happiness is knowing that there are some things you can control and some things you cannot." And we're all familiar with the Serenity Prayer, which is all based around that concept. The second thing that's in the Genius Zone is what I call the genius move, which is the art of letting go of control of something you can't control and slipping into doing what you most love to do, because the 2 can be immediately transformed. The one can be transformed into the other very quickly if you know how to be with that moment in which you find yourself stuck. And so it's about how to get yourself unstuck and slip instantly into your Genius Zone. Whereas the Big Leap is a little more complicated how to get there, but I think it's good. You need to understand that first before you eat the cherry on the top.
I love that. Thank you.
I'm also interested. One of the other people I asked one time, I was gassing up my car and I went in to pay, and there was a bunch of people there, and the owner happened to be standing there. And I said, while I was waiting, what's the biggest problem you run into in running a gas station? I've asked that hundreds of times now to different business owners. And he said, oh man, there's two problems. God, if I could figure out how to solve these, that's when I really perk up, you know. But then when he told me what the problems were, I did not have a solution. My biggest problem, he said, is people steal my squeegees. He said, you want to know how many squeegees I've lost this week? And I said, tell me. 11 squeegees in 1 week. And okay, so number one problem, people steal my squeegees. My mind got completely bollocksed up trying to help him solve that one, you know. But the second thing he says, my other biggest problems happens once a month. Somebody gets talking on their cell phone and they forget they've got my hose plugged into their car, and they drive off and jerks the hose out. And if it goes well, it just spills a bunch of gas on the road. But if it doesn't go well, it injures their car and my pump and everything. So
I do not have either one of those problems.
you do not?
No.
Exactly.
I've never stolen a squeegee, but ironically, about 2 months later, I was busily in every speech I gave for the next couple of months, I'm telling everybody about the problems of the gas station guy, the squeegees and everything. So what happens about 2 months later, I'm gassing up my car and I get busy talking on my cell phone and I drive off. Unfortunately, it didn't hurt anything. It just jerked it out on the floor. That I had to alter my story a little bit to have that self-deprecating punchline in it. But I've gotten a lot of wisdom just out of asking people. Like I used to coach Michael Dell and his top 3 guys down at Dell Computer back in the 90s. And he was only 33 at the time, and I was about 50 or so. And I often came out of those meetings just blown away by what I'd learned from him, you know, and he felt good about what we were doing in our coaching and everything. But I think if we are really doing our jobs as coaches and helpers, we're going to be learning as much from the people we're coaching as they're learning from us. And that's a matter of choice. We can be in that state of consciousness. And to me, that's something that produces constant self-renewal, when you can be in that kind of I-thou relationship with your clients, rather than thinking of it as transferring information to them, that you're in a learning dialogue with them.
All I can say is I agree. Hard to disagree with that. Yeah, I think that's what mutual mentorship is all about. Quite honestly, that is, we all have something to learn from each other.
Yeah. One thing I like too about what you're saying is you learn as much from your failures, so-called failures, as you do from your mistakes. Like, what did you learn from that business that failed that enabled you to succeed at the next one?
You know, I think as much as you love an idea, if the world is telling you differently, it's hard. You know, Seth Godin's a friend of mine, you know, went to business school with him, and he has a book called The Dip, and you have to like be patient for the dip because there's on the other side. But this is where your intuition kicks in as well. Yeah, the world could be telling you things, but if the world's telling you things, but you still believe it, you got to stick with it. I have a question for Gay, and I'm going to make it very brief, and it's very audacious. And then I want to get to our questions from our audience. If that's okay, Stephen.
Yeah, great.
Here's my audacious question, Gay. I am a gay man, and I knew at age 12 or 13, and it was so hard. And learning how to try to be a macho all-American high school water polo player, playing on the Stanford water polo team, being in a fraternity, having girlfriends, etc. When you were growing up, the word gay didn't necessarily mean what it means today, you know, in terms of what the popular meaning. But how has this name influenced your life as a man, as a straight man, over the course of your 70 odd years? I hope you don't mind me asking the question.
Oh, no, I don't mind any. I'm an open book. Where I grew up in the deep South. There's a lot of people name men. It's more of a men's name than it is elsewhere. Like a lot of the names I grew up with, you don't hear them like guy that sat next to me in second grade was named Beauregard. You don't run into a lot of Beauregards out here in California. And Billy Bobs and Jim Bobs and Sally Janes and things like that. But anyway, so it was irrelevant when I was a kid. It was just something because my dad was named that also. And actually, I didn't run into it as a term for homosexuality until I think it was when I got out to California, maybe in 1970, 71. But it was somewhere back along in there.
Yeah.
But I think it plays to my advantage in a lot of ways because it looks interesting on a marquee. It's a good marquee name in the sense that if a person sees it's kind of curious, they look twice. And so I've, to my knowledge, haven't had any negative associations to it.
That's beautiful. Well, thank you. Thank you for, so you were gay junior.
Yeah, well, I was part of the lineage.
I mean, you were gay junior. That's like, who knows? I think that's actually what you should be putting up there on the marquee. And people might actually think it's a porn flick, but.
Well, you've given me some real good business ideas today, Chip. Thank you. You're a master of the genre.
So great. So I've got a handful of questions. Most of them are for both of you, and I'm going to just kind of take them one by one. The first question is from Eve. Do you see a difference between an alchemist and Mother Earth / nature?
No.
I don't really see that. I mean, it is the source of all alchemy.
Yeah.
You were saying something interesting about earlier, Chip, about having some of your big realizations in nature. I had never really thought about it until you mentioned that, but two of the huge realizations of my life came when I was out walking in the forest with nobody else around. So I think, we can drink deeply from whatever source there is, and nature's the big one.
And nature's doing that right now. I mean, let's just be honest. Climate change is about alchemy, in a big, broad form.
Yeah, and I would go so far as to say I believe that through experience, there is a wisdom that exists when we immerse ourselves into nature. And I think we attune to something that has to do with much more intuitive aspects of ourselves, or even spiritual aspects to ourselves. So I think to both of your points, it is both alchemy and wise, and nature is sort of the landscape or the setting for the creation of those things.
Yeah, it's a metaphor. I mean, go into nature and then ask the question, go spend an hour and then ask the question, nature, what are you here to teach me today? And then look for the metaphors, look for interdependence or resilience or beauty in something that's broken. Yeah. I mean, it's there, and then come back and say, how can I actually incorporate that into my life?
Yeah. Very good. Very good.
That actually led to one of the biggest moments of my life. In 1974, I was out in the forest, and I had this quest. I wanted to find what the one thing is that we humans were off center on, that if we could just correct it, everything would flow better. I had this feeling there was something we were universally suffering from. And so I had this sequence of thoughts where I realized, wow, I've always gone for the answers to things like that to books or professors, or at the time I did a lot of studying with Krishnamurti, went to a lot of his lectures and things like that on the spiritual side of things. And but I realized I'd never directly just asked the universe. And so I had this moment out in the forest where I said, okay, what is the one thing we human beings are doing wrong that if we corrected it and did something different, life would just flow easily with us rather than fits and starts and bumps and grinds and things like that. And I just stood there for a minute, and all of a sudden I got this incredible rush of energy that went through me that was completely unlike what I was expecting. I think I expected a printout to my question, but what happened was this big rush of energy. And what it let me know was that there's a quotation from James Joyce's book where he said, Mr. Duffy lived a short distance from his body. And I realized that all my life I'd been living 6 inches from my body in the sense of never really experiencing what I was experiencing. And so in that moment, I just opened up and let myself feel whatever I was feeling. And I went through this whole cycle of things. But the bottom line was I realized that pretty much the problems that I was experiencing came from an unloved part of myself that I'd never really let myself experience. And so I just let myself experience and love it as it was. And that became such a mainstay part of my practice then, was to help people find whatever that unlovable part of themselves was and open up to loving that.
So good. So good. I have a question from Linda. Have any of you been faced with fear of failure, or does passion cancel that out?
To me, we should take fear just like the time of the day, not make a big deal of it. Oh, I'm scared. What am I scared about? But a lot of people define themselves by running from their fear and rather than experiencing it. Walt Whitman had a great line in one of his poems where he says, I am large and contain multitudes. And we all are. You know, we have fear, we have anger, we have joy, we have desire, we have sorrow. All of those things, to me, we need to open up and expand our center so that we embrace those things in the wholeness, the oneness of ourselves. And when we do that, suddenly life takes on a whole different complexion, because we're now experiencing life directly. And so we're going to be able to interact with people more directly and authentically.
Beautiful.
I would say that the question I get to when I'm feeling fear or anxiety is, what's behind the fear? Is it fear of public failure, being ashamed or embarrassed or humiliated? Is it fear of not knowing enough? Is it fear of being stuck doing this forever? And then I go to that, because the fear and anxiety is something that can be incredibly debilitating. But in my book, Emotional Equations, it's 18 different equations about emotions. One of the equations is anxiety equals uncertainty times powerlessness, because social science has shown that 98% of anxiety tends to be one of those ingredients: uncertainty or powerlessness, things I don't know or things I don't control. And then I get really clear and I create an anxiety balance sheet and say, what can I control? What can I have some influence over? What do I know? And so it's often the process of allaying the fear or the anxiety is to go deeper into what's there behind it, and to recognize, either you try to solve it by getting more of what is that you need, or dismissing it, like, I don't care if I'm, the public humiliation, or do you step away and say, wow, this is a very relevant fear, and it's one that I don't want to pursue, and therefore I'm going to step away from what I'm fearing, which might be the right answer, because fear is there for a reason, in terms of the evolutionary reasons. But unfortunately, so much of our current day nervous system is based upon the fight, flight, freeze way of the caveman.
Exactly. We've inherited a lot of old equipment to run our modern eldership with, and our nervous system was designed when there were actual saber-toothed tigers to deal with, rather than just saber-toothed bosses to deal with.
And this stems off of what you were just talking about, Chip, which is, the things that when I get into a fearful situation, if I can turn that into, or turn myself towards curiosity or wonder, then all of a sudden you have this sort of distance from the fear, and you can begin to observe it, notice it, even have a conversation with it, ask it questions. What is it here to teach me? Things of that nature. So the next question that I have is from Kim. How do you counter ageism in others and yourself?
Mm. Well, let me try that one first, even although I'm the younger of the two of us. So when I came out with the book, a well-known executive recruiter who was about my age, and I'm 61, the book came out when I was 57, the book Wisdom at Work. And she says, you're going to get a lot of people who are our age coming to you and saying, okay, what do I do to get a job? How do I, Botox in the face, changing my hair color, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And she said to me, what I say to my clients is the following: if you show up with curiosity and a passionate engagement for what you want to do in this job interview and with this potential job, what people will notice is not your wrinkles, they'll notice your energy. And it's when they notice your energy that they say they lean in and they want to learn more. And at that point, they are more focused on your stage of life than your age of life. Now, it's a beautiful answer. It's a beautiful way for her but ageism does exist.
Yeah.
So let me start by saying that's a great answer from her. And I actually think it's really important because so much of ageism is internalized. And if people want to understand the studies on this, write me, chip@chipconley.com. Lots of internalized ageism. It's part of the reason we created the Academy. It's part of the reason there's been a rampant midlife suicide spike up over the last 20 years. But when you see it in other people, or if it's in the workplace, you need to call it out. It's just like racism. It's just like sexism. It's like homophobia. Ageism is a thing. It is a bias. It's a cultural bias. And we need to call it out. And for those who want to learn more about it, watch Ashton Applewhite, who's on our faculty here at MEA. Watch her TED Talk on ageism. It's a beautiful rumination on how we can call ageism out. Okay, I'll let you take the rest.
Yeah, well, it's definitely something that's a force field. I remember as another way to look at it, I was very expanded one time by something I occurred on my first visit to mainland China back in 1986. And it was a time when there was not a lot of traffic back and forth to China. It was just kind of getting underway in a big way. But I was over there at a time where there was a gentleman who was about 60 years of age, who had this beautiful white brush cut. And he said something interesting, that he'd been to China many times. And I said, what context? And he said, well, I came over usually with young engineers from my company because the Chinese won't listen to you unless you have some gray in your hair, unless you have some gray hair on your team. Wow. And I remember saying, wow, that's a very interesting way to look at things, because it's pretty much the exact opposite with some of the high-tech firms I'd been in, where they kind of looked at me like, I was some fossil from the past. Even I'd written a bunch of books and everything, like, who is this person, and to me, though, I have had such a great time in my elder years, like even over the past 15 years, I started writing mystery novels, and I've since written 9 mystery novels and have 3 more in the can, and a movie deal cooking and things like that. So I have only good things to say about the elder years, because I've uncovered levels of creativity that I've never had before. And also our relationship, like Katie and I have just gone into spaces together over the past 10 years or so that we never got to in our early times together, partly just because we've got more experience under our belt now. And even things like lovemaking, which are supposed to decline over time, in my 70s has gotten transcendently great, much different than I ever imagined it would be. And so I can't say enough good things about getting old if you do it the right way.
Good for you.
Unfortunately, there's a whole bunch more questions, and we're at the top of the hour. well, first and foremost, in reading the chat strings here, there's just a lot of love and appreciation for both of you, Gay and Chip, for the wisdom, for the insight, for the provocative nature in which you showed up here today. And I want to thank you both personally. You've meant a lot to my world, both in your writings and our relationship together. And so I want to thank you for showing up here today. How can people find out about the work that you're doing? How can they reach out to you? Gay, would you like to go first?
Sure. The main place is hendricks.com, HENDRICKS.com. Also, we're doing a lot of work nowadays with our nonprofit foundation, which is the Foundation for Conscious Living. And those are, I think we have something like 17 different websites, but if you go to one of those two, you'll find everything else.
Oh, so good. Thanks.
And for me, I'd say, I mean, there's chipconley.com. You can go there, but modernelderacademy.com is probably the best place. And it's a new website that just went live today. So for those of you who've seen it before, check it out. It's a little fresher. And then I have a daily blog called Wisdom Well. And Stephen has in fact been a guest blogger on it. And it's a daily blog and it's free. And all you need to do is just Google Chip Conley Wisdom Well, and it'll take you right there. And you get a morning email from me each day that's a little microdose of wisdom.
It's a brilliant daily piece of wisdom. I read it every day. Gentlemen, I applaud both of your work. For anyone who wants to get up with me, the beautiful business is out in the world. You can find out pretty much everything I'm doing at matterco.co. That is my consulting company. And again, this is going to be recorded. And for those who couldn't attend here today, I'll post it up later online. And Chip, Gay, it's just an absolute pleasure as always. Thank you so much for your presence, for your wisdom, and for your beautiful energy.
Well, thank you for being the social alchemist to bring us together.
Yeah, thank you so much, Stephen. This is very generous and kind of you. And a great book, by the way. And the foreword to it is written by someone I'm intimately familiar with, me.
I appreciate that.
Good. All right.
All right, guys.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks so much. Be well.
Thanks a lot.
Bye-bye.